Okay, Parshas Shemos. Thank you all for coming. I want to discuss with you a topic that is very applicable now and throughout life. It's something which initially might sound like a stira, a contradiction, but in fact it is not a contradiction at all. We have two different midos, anava and ha'aza. What I like to call, in reverse order, audacity and humility. And oftentimes we can find extreme cases of each of these, but I think it's actually the confluence of these two that is what we should all be striving for. So let's talk about that. Moshe Rabbeinu becomes the leader of Klal Yisrael. We know that he was Anav Mikol Adam. He was the most humble of all men, the Torah tells us. We see it all over the place. Chazal tell us in a medrash that he looked after the smallest of sheep with tremendous care and concern, clearly coming from a point of humility, not receiving any recognition for the acts of kindness that he was doing to the animals, and yet caring for something so small, seemingly insignificant. For after all, if you don't see yourself as so important, and so only your time is only meant for those great achievements in life, but rather you recognize your place in the world, and we'll see how we balance these two midos, but you have humility, you're humble, then of course it's much more natural to look after and to care and think about even the smallest of concerns, even those that don't have a direct impact on you. Moshe Rabbeinu resisted greatly to become the leader of Klal Yisrael. He was willing to immediately recognize and even marshal to his defense that he should not be the leader his speech impediment. He wasn't hiding from it. He had humility. He was willing to recognize his own deficiencies where they existed, his own weaknesses. He recognized the strengths of his brother Aaron and suggested he should be the leader. A true leader, the Torah is teaching us, the leader of Klal Yisrael, the ultimate leader of Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu. He's mostly described as Anav Mikol Adam, the most humblest of man. He expressed and exhibited tremendous humility. For a great leader is not someone who leaves his home, tackles the world's problems, and only looks for the grandest of problems to solve. If that's what comes his way, so be it. If that's the position he's in, so be it. But he doesn't try to ignore and dismiss the responsibilities, perhaps that might be so much smaller and quote-unquote insignificant when you look at the world's scheme of things, within his own home, within his own family. But no, he takes care of each individual, his own family, his home. If there's one person struggling, it's something that's of care and concern to him. Look at Moshe Rabbeinu. Look at the Gedolei Hador that we've had over the generations and how caring and concerning they were of each individual member of Klal Yisrael. It didn't matter how small in the grand scheme of things their particular issue or concern was. That's anivus. That's humility. You see a friend struggling, could be he's academically struggling, emotionally, spiritually, whatever the situation is, physically, however he's struggling, recognize you helping him is significant. You're not better than that. You're not bigger than that. If you have an opportunity to help someone else, that's chashuv. And it's so much more natural and easy to see it, recognize it, and actually do something about it when you possess this midah of humility, of anivus. And we'll talk about how to develop it a little bit. You see a friend who's being bullied, who's being bothered by another person, stand up to that bully. Now, of course, that takes humility, but then it takes this other midah of audacity, to be audacious, to be brazen, to stand up, to go above and beyond what you would be comfortable with, to stand up against an injustice. And these two midos really work hand in hand with each other. It's just tricky sometimes When do you employ one and when do you employ the other? Some would actually say that the current president we have won based on this message of standing up with audacity against powers that seem too powerful, and yet being humble and willing to look after what I think he or others coined as the forgotten man and woman, each individual member of the country. It is the balancing of humility, looking after each individual. Nobody's too small for me to care about. And yet the audacity of standing up to an injustice, no matter how difficult it might seem to do, and how much more powerful they might seem than you, you're willing to do it. So let's talk about a couple of practical outcomes of these midos that are so important. Let's focus on humility. I heard from my wife, she said that in this medrash with Moshe Rabbeinu, he actually apologized to the sheep that he was caring for, saying, I didn't realize you were thirsty. It is only a humble man who can apologize. Really apologize. Say, I don't know. Someone asks you a question. Some people feel the need to always immediately give an answer, even if it's not such a good answer. Even if deep down inside somewhere they know they have no clue what they're talking about, or they know it's an incomplete answer. They got to answer. Why? That comes from an inner deficiency, a lack of self-confidence, and thereby a lack of a capability to be humble. To say, I don't know, let me look into that. Good question. Good question. Not only is there nothing wrong with that, it's an amazing lesson to teach whoever's listening to you. I don't know. Let me look into it. The ability to apologize, to say, I was wrong, you were right, and mean it, is so crucial in life, in every area of life, in every interactive area of life, in interpersonal relationships. And humility is at the core. And hear carefully what I just said. It is actually, again, that self-confidence. We might even call it audacity, feeling chashuv about yourself intrinsically, that actually in a healthy way then leads to the ability to be humble, to have humility, because it doesn't destroy you to apologize. You don't need to boost yourself up by always insisting you're right, or always having the answer to every question. So we see again how these two midos work so hand in hand with each other when each one is at their correct and perspective balance. It also allows something what I call principles versus practicals to exist. And I find myself having this conversation very often with teenagers and even with adults. When do we stand on principle and when do we just be practical? You might see a friend, even an adult, maybe sometimes a rebbe, a teacher, who you feel, and you might have 10 ways of explaining this and arguing this in a court of law that they're wrong and you're right. But is it practical to do so? Okay, so I'm going to argue with my teacher, let's say in the example, and ultimately I'm going to win the argument. Everyone listening will say, ooh, you won. And then I fail. And then I get punished for what I did. And it comes off across as chutzpahdik. That's not being practical, that's being principled. But it's being principled without boundary. You always want to maintain your internal principles of what's right and wrong, but sometimes, certainly temporarily, it makes sense to just end, especially on a small, petty situation, to just end it. You're right. I'm wrong. Sorry. Move on. You'd rather lose the friendship forever because you must stand firm on your principles instead of, you're right, I'm wrong. Sorry. Let's move on. A petty, obviously a big deal. And if there's chas v'shalom abuse or other terrible things happening, this obviously doesn't apply. And every case has to be judged for itself. But in the many examples where it's petty, small things, is it worthwhile to stand on principles? Or does it make more sense? Oh, you're right. Let's move on. I'm sorry. Be practical. Principles versus practicals requires humility. It requires the ability to humble yourself and be okay with that. And maybe later you'll readdress the situation with that teacher or whoever, the friend or whoever it is. At a later time when things have calmed down and it's more in private and you can have a more respectful, calm conversation trying to understand, maybe even then the teacher, if they have that ability, would say, maybe they'll point out how you're really wrong and you'll understand. Maybe they'll say, no, I was really wrong, and they'll apologize to you. But that's the way to do it when it comes to these small issues. That so often it's the small issues that get in the way of meaningful and lasting accomplishments and relationships. Don't let that happen. Principles versus practicals. Then we have Audacity. Moshe Rabbeinu kills the Mitzri. Quite an audacious move. He didn't just walk that by. He saw the injustice. He didn't say, I'm such a humble man, I'm so low. How could I take care of this problem? No. He said, I must do something about this injustice that I see. And that does go together with humility. Because being humble doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. It means thinking of others. That's actually a quote that some attribute to a certain poet, but it's debatable. But that's what humility is. It's still being machshav yourself, thinking of yourself as a great, significant, chashuv person who can accomplish in this world, but making sure you put yourself in proper perspective amongst all the other human beings in this world. And that you're willing to bend, and you're willing to be practical at times. Moshe Rabbeinu argues with the Ribono Shalom. Of anybody, so to speak, that we would ever argue with, obviously it takes the most audacity to argue with Hashem himself, the creator of everything. On behalf of Klal Yisrael, he does it. He knows that he's the one to do that. And Moshe Rabbeinu smashes the luchos. Who knows what the last Rashi in the Chamishe Chumshe Torah talks about? The last Rashi in the Torah. It's Yiyasher Kochacha Sheshibarta. The last Rashi in the Torah ends off, Rashi's Perush al Torah ends off with, good job, Moshe, for breaking the luchos. There was a cheshbon, there was a reason for breaking the luchos. Moshe Rabbeinu acted as the leader at that time. And it takes audacity to be able to do that, of course. These are the luchos that the Ribono Shalom created for you, and you smash them. So you see once again, Anav Mikol Adam doing these things. The two midos must and actually only exist when they go hand in hand with each other. It's not a stira. You need the right balance, but they need to both exist. So how do you develop this confluence of midos, this balance? Well, one thing to think about is, are you comfortable with yourself? When you're alone with yourself, if you find yourself alone and in a quiet room, you have nothing particularly on your mind, you're not reading or engaged in any activity, is your first thought, and it's normal for it to be your first thought for many people, but is your first thought, what can I do and what can I listen to and what can I read? And I don't want to be alone in a quiet situation with myself. I don't really know myself. I'm not really comfortable with myself alone, so to speak. This is a concept Professor Neuberger would always used to speak about a lot. If you're driving to New York, turn your radio off. For a chelik of the trip, for a part of the trip, turn your radio off, have no music, just watch the passing scenery and think. See where your mind goes. And this is really related to the overall topic that I want to discuss with you here in terms of how to develop healthy self-confidence, self-awareness, and ultimately then being able to develop proper humility, balanced well with audacity. The Rosh Hashiva just spoke at a Tag Asifa 2 days ago, I think. And one of the main points he said was, yeah, there are lots of tremendous dangers about the internet and technology, and some of them are really extreme. But one of the things he mentioned is one of the biggest issues with it, with technology in general, and this applies to everyone, not just those who are going to the extreme areas of technology. and that is distraction. We now have something which has the capability to so easily and so successfully keep us constantly distracted. We never actually develop comfort with our own minds, within our own selves. And so, to actually take some time to disconnect from whatever technology, or even here in yeshiva, any other distractions that might be around you, to recognize and feel and be aware of your own thoughts and where they go, of your own self. To take some time each day. You could be in the middle of a jam-packed base medrash with a Musar Sefer open in front of you during Musar Seder. You can close your eyes, not pay attention to all the people around you, and you can actually just think, what are your thoughts right now? That right there, in the midst of hundreds of people all around you with noise, is you being alone with yourself, within your own mind. Connected to this idea is something that is a newly coined term of mindfulness, but it's something which obviously has been around for a long time amongst Bali Machshava, Bali Musar, and that is live in the present. So you're walking from the base medrash to the dining room. Pay attention to one blade of grass that you pass on the way. For what purpose? There's so much exquisite detail all around you at every moment. It could be the blade of grass, it could be your fingernail. It could be the apple you're eating. It could be the peaks of the trees in the distance. Or at night, probably have to go out into the baseball field, but it's the stars in the sky. Think about the unbelievable detail on the smallest level and the grandeur of the world all around us, the chachma within our own bodies. Live in the present moment of what's going on immediately around you. And then pay attention to your thoughts as they think about these things. Don't just mindlessly walk, mindlessly wander, but think about what's around you, what's in you and around you. It's incredible to think about. And this being mindful is actually something which develops the person again from the inside. Being okay with having just quiet and just paying attention to your thoughts without even looking at anything, and then also living in the present moment. It doesn't have to be constantly. It's normal for the brain to go into autopilot every once in a while and to rest it. You can't always constantly be mindful, but to pick one walk, 1 5-minute period where you are mindful of your surroundings, where you do notice things right here in this room that you might have never noticed before. Not because they're so significant, just the opposite. They're insignificant, but you just became more mindful of your situation. It expands the mind. Mixed with being comfortable within your thoughts, being alone, it can have a powerful effect on your self-awareness, your self-confidence, and thereby being okay with developing that midah of humility, coupled with the right times for being audacious, for audacity. Having that greater self-confidence that you matter no matter what goes on around you, that audacity coupled with, but at times, I need to bend, and I need to look out for others, no matter how insignificant it might seem. I care, I'm concerned, just as we see with Moshe Rabbeinu. I heard once from my friend Rav Noam Himberg that, I think he must have read it or heard it somewhere, that Rabbi Avigdor Miller, once Rabbi Avigdor Miller's grandson was in Rabbi Avigdor Miller's apartment or house, and I don't think he was supposed to be there at that time, so he hid under the table when he heard his grandfather coming. Now, Rabbi Avigdor Miller was known to be very mindful of Niflos HaBorei at all times. He listened to a lot of his shiurim, the apple, the tree, the flower, the insects, the bugs, the birds, everything. And when he would eat an apple, it was something to be seen. You would hear the descriptions and the excitement of eating an apple. So there was a bowl of apples on the table, and Rabbi Avigdor Miller walks into his home, and his grandson's hiding under the table. And his grandson says over that he remembers distinctly that his grandfather sat at the table. He had no clue that his grandson was under the table. He took an apple, he made a loud bracha, and as he was eating it, he was commenting out loud in an empty home about the beauty, the taste, the perfect mixture of crispness but softness for our teeth, etc., all about the apple. That's a person who's true to himself, even when he's alone. What better way to judge a man than how he acts when he's all by himself, not in front of other people? Even when he's alone, appreciating the Ribono Shalom, being mindful of his situations, not mindlessly going from one thing to the next. And it is through those types of exercises, many practical examples we just discussed, being alone with your thoughts in front of a sefer, a couple minutes a day, noticing aspects of the Bria within you and around you 1 or 2 times a day, looking out for your friends and practicing audacity when it's appropriate, standing up to any type of bullying or meanness, being there for friends outside of you, expressing that audacity in that way externally, especially for others who are in trouble, who are hurting, who are in pain. And blending these two seemingly opposite but perfectly complementing midos of audacity and humility. If we're able to blend these two midos together, the more we do it, the more we work on it, the better they become blended, the more we are able to emulate what Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us in that perfect balance of these two midos. And Eretz Hashem, the more we work and strive towards becoming more and more like Moshe Rabbeinu, the ultimate leader of Klal Yisrael, the more Eretz Hashem will give the Ribono Shalom so much nachas that he'll bring Mashiach Tzidkenu b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Good Shabbos.